talk about like a combination of a few different things, right? So definitely we'll talk about like where Ethereum is at today and how I think it makes sense to approach Ethereum and the wider space from the perspective of someone coming in to be a builder or even to be a researcher. Also, just some of my experiences in the crypto space and doing technology in general, and like some of the lessons that I wish I had 10 years ago and things that are going to be very relevant right now, as well as a bit of like pretty deep math and cryptography, because I know people here love polynomials as much as I do. So I think the place where, to start off with the crypto space in particular, right? The way that I see this is that it's in this interesting transition where the last decade was about building basic infrastructure in theory, and the next decade is going to be about bringing these ideas to the world. And the two pictures that I have here are basically two different people trying to build Twitter on the blockchain, right? And the left is one from 2015, and the right is one from 2024, right? And so the one from 2015, like you can see it, right? It's like a very simple interface, and it's the sort of thing that you'd be able to like probably code up in a few hours just on your own, or probably even 30 minutes if you just like told GPT to figure it out first. And it's like a very basic thing, right? And the way that it works is kind of very simple, very naive. You have a tweet, and it hooks up into the Web3 JavaScript API. So when you click send, it's not in the screenshot, but it's probably just like one of those default HTML buttons. You click send, and like it goes through the API, send the transaction, goes on the blockchain, and then the entire contents of the tweet are just on chain, right? And so every single person who is part of the Ethereum network, that tweet is going to be on your laptop if you have a node, and so everyone stores everybody's messages. 2024, so this is a client called Firefly, and this is something that you can actually go and sign up for and use today. I actually use it myself, right? So whenever I write a blog post and I tweet it out, I usually push it out onto Twitter and Farcaster and Lens, which are kind of the top two decentralized Twitters on Ethereum right now at the same time. And this is basically a client that lets you read and write to basically all of them at the same time, right? And you can look at it and the interface looks very professional, right? It looks very nice. It looks like the sort of thing that you would want to use if you're used to Twitter. It's it's clearly just like a very well-polished product, and the underlying infrastructure that it hooks into is actually made with a much more sophisticated design than the stuff in 2015, right? So in 2015, if you make a tweet, the entire context will go on the blockchain. Farcaster is actually a more sophisticated architecture where it does some things on the Ethereum blockchain. I mean, technically through a layer 2 called optimism. Basically things like registering user accounts, changing who owns a user account, unlock usernames, like that kind of stuff. It does on the blockchain. The tweets on Farcaster, I mean, they call them casts, but you can call them tweets if you want. I won't beat you if you call them tweets. They go on this other structure called a CRDT, basically a replicated data store, and it aims for a weaker property than a blockchain, which is basically that every message gets to every node, but it doesn't try to agree on order, right? And so basically it's like choosing the right decentralized structure to follow, right? And because of that, it manages to be much more efficient than a blockchain is, and it actually manages to be much cheaper, and you don't have to do this annoying thing where you pay $1.57 every time you tweet. And so that's one of the, basically a big set of improvements in the 9 years that have been in between these two, right? So this is kind of the difference that I think we're going to see between many different kinds of applications, and I think we're going to see a lot more things like this over the next few years. So I think there's an important difference to think about between what I call early stage spaces and what I would call mature spaces, right? So early stage spaces, one example is modern AI, so like LLMs making images, I think is still early stage space. I would call space travel early stage. I would call longevity early stage. Mature, Web 2, social networks, search engines, mainstream pharmaceuticals, right? So like that's kind of the difference between the two, right? And there's like different styles of thinking that I think make sense in these two, right? So if you're in an early stage space, then the thinking style is what I would call, or this is a term that Robin Hansen popularized, farm mode versus engineer mode, right? So thinking about those things in like a very abstract and a very ideas and theory-driven way versus in a mature space, much more hero mode, much more focused on like the problem that's right in front of you. So focus, building amazing things versus meeting specific needs of users. The skills that are the most valued, pure math and sciences, engineering. And these are, like both of these are valued across the spectrum, but the emphasis is greater on pure math and sciences and engineering on the early stage side, and on the mature side, industry experiences. And I think one of the sadder things, and this is just something that I think you need to be prepared for, which is that like cooperativeness, I think, is higher in early stage spaces and lower in mature spaces, right? Basically, when you're still in kumbaya mode, like good, enjoy it. Kumbaya mode is good, right? And you have people sharing all of their different ideas, and it just like feels like a really nice and beautiful intellectual salon. Eventually, people stop doing that, and a lot of people start basically trying to like hoard ideas for themselves because that's what the VCs tell you they have to do if you want to have a valuation to invest in, right? I actually don't think that's true, and I actually think it is possible to still make a lot of money while being open, and actually within the Ethereum space itself, there's a lot of examples of that. But the mentalities do definitely like start shifting toward the less cooperative side, and I think it's like very good to fight against that, but like some of that will happen. So I think what's interesting about crypto is that it is an early stage space and a mature space at the same time, right? And one of the reasons I think about this is there's this dichotomy that if you're in the crypto space for longer than a few days, you'll pretty much notice that this exists, right? The distinction between idealistic crypto and money crypto, right? So money crypto basically includes things like airdrop farming, trying to get APYs, speculating on stuff, restaking, creating DeFi protocols on top of DeFi protocols, trying to create coins that are not financially sustainable and have 19% APRs that eventually they break. So that's one side of things. And then there's also idealistic crypto, which basically talks about more cool and abstract stuff, and preserving privacy, building 21st century cyber democracy, creating more open versions of protocols like Twitter, of financial protocols, decentralized social media, DAOs, new ways for groups of people to govern themselves, and all of these really fascinating ideas, right? Basically, building all kinds of social structures and better versions of both markets and democracy on top of these sort of technological and cryptographic rails, right? And I think the stuff on the left kind of is a mature space. People have been figuring out how to make coins that go up for a while, and people kind of know how to do it. But the space on the right, I think, is still early, and that's the one that I actually think still right now has a lot of potential. And the basic reason is, right, that for the space on the left, you don't actually need the blockchain to work very well, right? Basically, if your transactions cost $20 each, fine, gamblers are still going to gamble if they have to pay $20 each. For the stuff on the right, if you want to build, a decentralized Twitter in a way that people who are regular people are actually going to use, it needs to actually be affordable. It needs to actually have a good user experience. It needs to actually the time between you tweeting and other people seeing the tweet can't be some random Poisson distribution centered around somewhere between 1 minute and sometimes it's even worse than a Poisson distribution and it goes out to 30 minutes, right? It has to be a few seconds. And I think actually only over the last couple of years, a whole bunch of these important UX problems actually have been solved, right? So if you look at transaction fees, for example, in 2019, it got $1 to $5 per transaction. In 2024, on these layer 2 platforms that are basically these networks on top of Ethereum that are providing this extra scalability to Ethereum, fees are often less than $0.01, right? So this is a chart of transaction fees on these layer 2 networks, and you see a bit of a discontinuity there, right? And okay, fine, it's not like your calculus niche would call it discontinuity, but it's what and it's what people in normal lands call it discontinuity, right? So basically, you have this time, which actually is March 13th. It's when an upgrade to Ethereum called a Dan Krugman happened, which basically created this feature called blocks, which basically adds this extra data space to Ethereum blocks that layer 2 protocols can use to put their transactions into. And so it added this extra space, and it basically created these two separate fee markets for layer 1 and layer 2, and it significantly increased layer 2's scalability. And as a result of that, transactions basically went from being still cheaper than they were 2 years ago, but still too expensive, to the point where now, we're literally talking about 1 cent, and you can literally build things with this. So that's fees. Transaction inclusion time, there was something called ENP 1559 that did a lot here, basically a reform to how blockchain fee markets work that was actually inspired by some discussions I had with economics academics in Cornell back in 2018. And basically talking about first price auctions and second price auctions, and how actually both of them suck, and if you can make a fixed price mechanism, then it's better. And that ended up reducing the transaction inclusion time from this very kind of Kafka-esque worse than Poisson distribution of 1 to 60 minutes down to 5 to 20 seconds, right? And then since then it's 1 second on layer 2s. Wallet security, so we started off having EOAs, which are externally owned accounts, which are a fancy term for accounts that are controlled by one cryptographic key and are controlled by the same key forever, to more complicated designs where you can basically swap out your key, you can have multiple keys, you can have much more sophisticated forms of security. So a lot of these UX problems actually have been solved, right? And basically there's this pretty big change in the application stack that you end up building if you're building applications in the 2010s versus 2020s, right? So one thing that I will get into a bit later is zero knowledge proofs, which are the frontier both of scaling and of privacy. So super important technology to get to know. And scalability, how you interact with wallets, how you solve things like the anti-symbol problem, so basically verifying which users are actual people instead of being bots. And the kind of infrastructure that you have in the 2020s is just much more powerful, right? And so basically the thesis is that money crypto, so kind of the thing on the left in that diagram a few slides ago, doesn't really depend much on these kinds of upgrades, right? But what I call idealistic crypto and basically with all of this stuff around building new and more open internet protocols and social structures that can be secured by cryptography, and they can have this kind of shared memory that's that everyone can have consensus on, that runs on chain. That and doing that well is still an early stage space, even today, despite being 15 years old, right? And I think a big part of the reason why is because the underlying technology only really became possible now. There's really cool stuff happening in idealistic crypto. So this is called Freedom Tool. It is a fully privacy protected voting solution. It's founded by Raramo. This is a company based in Kyiv in Ukraine. And what they're doing is they're using zero knowledge proofs on top of signatures that are generated by your passport, right? So these days, a lot of modern passports, they have a chip inside of them. That chip can generate signatures, and if you generate that signature, then you're basically also, by implication, create like that signature proves that you are a citizen of that country. And so what you do is you take that signature, and then you wrap it in a zero-knowledge proof, and then you use that to publish a vote. So what this zero-knowledge proof does is it proves that you are a citizen of this country, and it also basically gives every individual citizen a pseudo-randomly generated unique ID. So it's an ID that does not like publicly map you to who you are, but if you try to participate twice, you get the same ID twice, right? And so it proves that you haven't voted yet with the same identity, right? So you have voter anonymity, and you have a one per person property, and you have a property that is restricted to citizens of one particular country, right? And so basically you have this kind of anonymous voting system where just like anyone can basically go and just like spit up a vote for, in this case, citizens of a particular country. But you know, there's also versions of this that could work for other kinds of groups as well, as long as those groups are like digitally defined, right? So there's like actually like even like political groups trying to use this to kind of basically sort of create like DIY votes in places like Russia and Iran, which I think is actually quite interesting, right? Basically, it's like, even if your country is not a democracy, well, guess what? Spit up a Ziggy Start, you can make it a democracy. So this, like, basically, this is like very new technology that this stuff depends on, right? I mean, if you have like free hackathon time, you could probably figure out, like, you know, can you make this for Waterloo, right? Can you just like make a thing where you can vote, like basically only if you have some kind of electronic proof of like some kind of electronic ID, you know, like ID, whether it's you know, a card or just you know, an online account, right? Like there are ways to do this. So this is one of those really cool things that's happening. This is another thing, right? So this is called status, and it's basically a fully decentralized, like not even just end-to-end encrypted, but like actually decentralized version of Telegram, right? Basically, the way that it works is, you know, you actually have messages that get sent over a peer-to-peer network, so it does not depend on like any specific server in order to function. What like impresses me personally about this, right, is that like they actually like really go the extra mile, and they like really actually try to compete with Telegram on quality of UX, right? Like, you know, Telegram these days, like, it's not just a chat application, they have all of these community-oriented features, and Status does like the same kind of thing. You know, you have like basic encrypted chat, you have things like EMS for usernames, but then you also have the ability to spin up a community, and then you can even use like on-chain tokens to define like who is part of a community and who's not, and that defines who has the right to post in different places. So you have these like extremely fine-grained tools to do all of this kind of stuff, and like this is all done in the form of this application that is like both, you know, decentralized, right? So there is no like, you know, like central, like there is a status company that's developing it, but like that status company, they don't have like any backdoor keys to see everything, and the app doesn't even depend on Status the company to continue existing in order for the app to continue to be usable, right? And at the same time, like it actually has this, you know, like a very high quality level of UX, right? So so one of the big problems, or whatever that this kind of thing has, right, is basically the spam problem, right? Because in a decentralized system, anyone can spin up a billion fake accounts. You just like spin up a virtual machine, you just generate, or you know, basically spin up a billion virtual machines, generate a new account on each one, and then you go and spam people, right? In the previous version of Status, like that was done about 4 years ago, like basically just ended up dying, right? Like basically what happened was that it launched, and then a bunch of people just started creating like billions of fake accounts to spam them with like ads for their crypto tokens. And so now like you can actually make like cryptographic anti-denial of service solutions, right? You can make cryptographic solutions that use, again, zero-knowledge proof technology to basically verify that users actually are a member of some community, or that if they are like actually a unique person, like based on some kind of digital registry of who a person is, or like any kind of digital kind of like way of distinguishing them from a bot. But you can do this at the same time as preserving people's privacy, right? So my ideal in terms of this kind of idealistic crypto versus money crypto divide is basically to combine both, right? So one of the challenges I think that we've learned like over the last 20 years or so is that idealistic projects do have a very hard time actually getting the resources to be competitive in today's world. And like this does make me think back to a pretty sad story from about 10 or 15 years ago, right? Basically, I remember in the early 2010s, like back when, actually a little bit before I was here, there was a Facebook alternative called Diaspora, right? Like these days, like everybody wants alternatives to Twitter. Back then, everybody wanted alternatives to Facebook. And Diaspora tried to be this kind of more open source alternative to like Facebook, basically without the like Mark Zuckerberg's central control. But it ended up just like basically like kind of floundering over time, and basically the project ultimately just kind of did not end well, right? And I think a big part of the reason why is basically because if you take this kind of full idealistic route, then like you don't actually get resources, right? And I do think that like unfortunately, the world is definitely entering a somewhat more unfriendly kind of stage than it was 10 or 15 years ago, and so I think that it is definitely more true than before that like if you want to do good things, then you have to not just have good intentions, but you need to like also actually have resources and power. And so I do think that there's like a real value in figuring out how to like actually balance those two sides, right? Basically, the way that I think about this is when you create a new application, you're creating a social structure. You can think of a social structure as being an engine. An engine runs on different types of fuel, and the fuel is human motivations. That includes the desire to make money, and it also includes the desire to participate in things just because you believe that they're valuable. It includes the desire to have fun. It includes the desire to be in a place with your friends. It includes all of those things. Right, and you want to use these different types of fuel in order to balance each other and in order to try to achieve that goal, right? So you want to try to create something that is both valuable and sustainable. And I think this is probably one of the stronger cases for some of these kind of like alternatives to Twitter actually being blockchain-based, right? And like not even just blockchain-based, but even like having things like crypto tokens in them, right? Which is basically that like if you do that, then you actually have some kind of business model that does not depend on like either charging users in order to post, or that does not depend on advertising, right? Basically, like you actually have like a much wider array of options in terms of how you get your incentives in this kind of thing. And if you do that, then like you actually do get the economic resources in order to make something that for example, is a more open platform where anyone can like participate and plug into on the same level. That creates more options for people to like write their own plugins. Where even the algorithms that like do things like prioritizing people's posts are actually more aligned with what's good for the user instead of being more aligned with things like short-term engagement, right, and so on and so forth. I think like there are ways to combine these two things, but like it's an actual challenge that you need to really think about. So what should you study, right? So this is, I think, something that's super important. So ZK snarks are amazing, and I personally think that they are like equally important a technology to what I call the crypto space as blockchains are, right? So I've already mentioned them like 5 or 10 times, right? Basically, what these things do is they are proofs that let you prove some statement about some piece of information that you have in a way that has two properties. The first property is that you can prove statements about information that you have without revealing that information. The second property is that you can prove that statement in such a way that verifying the proof can happen much, much faster than running the original computation yourself, right? So you get provable computation and you get privacy-preserving computation at the same time. And the basic math behind how this is done, basically, it has to do with like these two ingredients. One of them is called arithmetization, and the other one is called polynomial commitments. Basically, arithmetization is the idea that if you have a computation, you re-express that computation as an equation between polynomials. Right, so over here I have this example. If you want to like look at it later, feel free to like screenshot it. Basically, you're trying to like figure out what is the 100th Fibonacci number, or it could be the millionth Fibonacci number, or whatever, right? And the way that it works is you set up a polynomial. We'll call it f, and then we'll say f of x is the x Fibonacci number, right? So f of 0 is the 0th, f of 1 is the 1st, and so on. Then what you're going to get is that the equation f of x plus 2 minus f of x plus 1 minus f of x is going to equal 0 across the range that you care about, right? So if you're doing it for 100 steps, it's going to equal 0 from 0 to 98. If you do it for 1,000,000 steps, it's going to equal 0 from like 0 to 99998, and so on, right? Now, if you have f that has that property, then what that also means by I think the factor theorem is that this polynomial, that is f of x plus 2 minus f of x plus 1 minus f of x, has to be a multiple of the simplest polynomial that has that property, which is z of x, which is just x minus 0 times x minus 1 times x minus 2 times blah, 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 times x minus 2, right? And so what you then do is you take the quotient, which is the thing based on f, divided by the thing I call z, you call that h, and if you prove that it's a polynomial, then you prove the original statement. So that's the math of it, right? Now, basically, there's a lot of complexity in how to like actually prove that h is a polynomial. There's a lot of complexity in like how to represent polynomials of like basically being like these like very succinct mathematical objects that are much smaller than the underlying data, right? Like this is called polynomial commitments, right? They're basically like hashes that you can do algebra on, basically. And there's the part that around preserving privacy is like actually not that hard, right? Basically, it kind of you get the privacy sort of almost for free, and the argument is that like if you can make a statement over a large amount of data where that statement is much smaller than the original data, then like information theoretically you basically have a lot of privacy already, right? And so all you need to do is you need to just like multiply everything by like some small given polynomial, and then you're fine. So very, very basic math here. I mean, I've written a bunch of blog posts on how this works. Darkware have. I highly encourage people to like study or understand this. A lot of the background for this stuff depends on number theory. Good old a to the power of d mod b equals a. Yep, remember that? Then you have computer science, so especially kind of like abstract theory around programming languages and like understanding the pipeline of like how you convert a C program all the way down into like addition and multiplication gates, and cryptography, right? So very valuable stuff to learn here. One other thing that I think is valuable is like, this is something that I think is important, is like abstract building things ability, right? So this is like how I think about what is valuable to try to learn today, especially in the context of all of these AI tools, right? Which is basically that I think modern AI is like very helpful in shrinking knowledge gaps, right? It actually helps noobs more than pros, right? And like this is something that I felt myself, right? Like I feel like AI has been much more helpful to me in like domains that are established domains but where I know nothing about than it has in like domains where I'm already personally at the frontier, right? And because in those domains where like I'm personally at the frontier, there's like maybe only a few hundred other people who are, and like it's not enough training data and starts hallucinating and says totally crazy stuff, right? But if it's like a domain that's like very well established, but where like I personally just happen to have not done it yet, like building a Chrome extension, it can just like one shot it and give you a Chrome extension that works, right? So basically, the thing that I think is valuable to like have as a skill is just the skill of like working with all these tools and just being able to like arbitrarily build stuff for your own use, right? So build a Chrome extension today, build an Android app tomorrow, just like pick a thing that you want to exist and like, you go figure out how to build it. I learned my programming by building games for myself to play. So building stuff for personal use, I think, is always good. Like paradigms in these fast-moving spaces are being replaced every 2 years, right? So if we go back to zero-knowledge proofs, 2 years ago, everything here was all about elliptic curves, right? And there were elliptic curve pairings, elliptic curve based data product arguments, things like Sproof's algorithm, like abstract, like algebraic geometry. Fast forward 2 years later, and it turns out that Starks, which are actually based on hashes, are faster. And so these days, actually, fewer people even care about elliptic curves, right? And so paradigms do change quickly, and so I think it's most important to try to get that kind of core knowledge that's fairly generalizable across all of these domains. And I actually think being a jack of all trades is better than being a specialist because you have more reference points, and so whenever the next paradigm comes along, there's a bigger chance that you actually get something that can you have reference points where you can start to understand where to start. People problems, I think, are important, right? So I think this is just my own experience doing projects, right? So the largest problems in any project are people problems, right? The stuff that will keep you up at night, the stuff that will make you cry, is not the polynomials. It's and I think you do not get good practice for this from school projects, right? Because in a school project, the incentives are so low stakes, right? It's okay, what's the worst somebody could do? Well, the worst somebody could do is go to steal, and now you have you're one person and you have to do a 4-person project, but realistically you're a Waterloo cool kid, and so you can go and do it and get 95% anyway, right? In the real world, no, if you get the wrong person in your project, then they are going to come up with clever legal engineering to keep you out of the company and move you without any shares, and they're going to distort your own vision into something that gives them $43.7 million, and then they go and buy a condo somewhere in the Toronto Trump Tower, and basically, really please make sure that you and your co-founders are aligned on values, right? And I mean both in terms of values of what you want to achieve in the world, but even values in terms of what you want to get out of the project for yourselves, and what kind of relationship you want to have with each other, with your investors, with your users, and with your community, right? And I think you can only really get practice at this stuff by building real things together, right? So I think, those are probably the things that are most valuable. So thank you guys, and wish you best of luck.
I think the polynomials will make me cry. That's just me. Questions? I will come around with the mic. Do we have a mic up there as well? Nancy, we do. Okay, thanks. Okay. And then over. Okay.
Hello, thanks Vitalik for bringing us here. And just wondering, do you think the SEC will stop going after crypto in January with the new administration?
That is so challenging to predict, right? I mean, obviously they've started to become much more friendly to the space over the past month or so. I think. I personally am not expecting things between now and the election, just because so many people obviously have their hands full on stuff. Next year. One, obviously I have no idea who he is, and two is that, the things that people say when they, when they're campaigning, and the things that people say when they kind of think about some idea abstractly are not necessarily the things that they do when they actually come into a real world position of power, right? And so, basically, I think it's just so hard to predict this stuff, especially in as a chaotic political environment as the lovely U.S. of A is. We will see, and I'm hoping for the best.
Hi, I think you are always good at doing things and it's very cool. And could you please give us some advice to find our passionate and it's good for the world? And also, which one do you prefer, the zero knowledge proof or the fully homomorphic encryption? Oh, by the way, I just found a small error in your learning West error of blog.
Okay.
Okay. Thank
Well,
you.
if you find an error in my blog,
Okay.
I have, the blog is on GitHub, github.com/Buterin/blog. Please send a
I will do that.
Advice on what kinds of things to work on. I mean, I think, within the domain that I'm focused on, I think a lot of this kind of less financialized crypto stuff, I think is super valuable, right? And I think a lot of this, it does, I think, touch on concerns that a lot of people have, right? In basically creating systems that are at the same time not controlled by one corporation, but at the same time that actually do preserve things that we hear about, creating incentives for people to say true things instead of saying fake things, for example, right? And getting both of those at the same time, I think is there's this combination of things like economic incentives and things like zero knowledge proofs and just the basic building blocks of internet and open source software that are I think super valuable, right? So I think for each of these things there's a bunch of projects, but there's a lot of really underclaimed stuff as well. Stuff to do with the identity space as well. So zero knowledge identity is also a sector that I care quite a bit about, right? And being able to prove that you're a human without revealing everything about yourself, I think it would be really valuable for society if that was basic infrastructure. So I think a lot of good things here. Also, a lot of another area is better tools for groups of people to be able to organize and collectively manage, whether it's events or whether it's assets or other things. So a lot of governance technology happening here too. So a lot of these spaces. In terms of ZKPs and FAG, I think. There are different tools that serve different use cases, right? So, the ZKP use case is basically, it's I have information, and I want to prove things to you about information that I have without revealing anything else except for what I'm proving, right? What ZKPs can't do is they can't create, do things with information that nobody has access to, right? So, with FAG, on the other hand, basically the use case is if you want someone to be able to do computation on data that is encrypted, and without, obviously, without actually being able to decrypt it, right? And a lot of the time in practice, FHE ends up working in this kind of, there's basically two contexts of kind of FHE, right? There's the two-party use case, and then there's the n-party use case, right? So I think also the term MPC, I actually don't really like it. I prefer thinking about 2PC, two-party computation, and NPC where you have n parties, as basically being two separate spaces, right? And 2PC is actually much simpler than NPC in a lot of ways, right? There's protocols like garbled circuits that have existed since the 1980s, but with FHE, basically, you end up relying on a threshold privacy assumption a lot of the time, right? So you end up relying on the assumption that says, for example, there's 10 people, and you need 8 of them in order to be able to decrypt it, and so 8 of them could collude and decrypt the answer, but then, on the other hand, if 3 of them disappear, then nobody gets the results of the computation, right? And so, in the case where you can figure out what kind of committee actually makes sense, then there are some applications where it makes a lot of sense. One actually really valuable one is anonymous voting, right? Because if we look at anonymous voting, the ZK Synarch-based stuff, it has privacy, it has verifiability properties, And if you're doing it on a blockchain, then it also has censorship resistance, right? Because you can just push your vote on chain. And the zero knowledge proof can basically like force whoever the calculator is to like actually block over all of the votes that have been published on chain at a particular location, right? But what the one weakness that ZKP-based voting has is there's like a particular very strong privacy property that traditional voting needs to have but it does not have, which is called coercion resistance, right? Basically, the property is that you should not be able to prove how you voted, even if you want to prove that. And the reason why coercion resistance is valuable is because if you don't have it, then like it becomes very easy to bribe people to vote in a particular way. It becomes easier to force people to vote in a particular way, right? And in like traditional paper-based voting, we have secret ballots for that exact reason, right? With a secret ballot, like you have no way to prove which candidate you voted for, right? With just zero knowledge code proofs, you can't get that. But if you combine encryption and zero knowledge proofs and fully homomorphic encryption, then you can. There's a project called Macy, which does this in a way that has like a one-of-one assumption on a trusted party for coercion resistance, but no assumptions for all the other parts. And then with FHE, you can take that same thing and you can convert the one-of-one assumption into an evidence assumption, right? So there's like really valuable stuff in only FHE that's like that. Though I think there is a really huge number of use cases where like realistically CKPs just are what you want. And I think the nice thing about CKPs now is like they've improved so much in efficiency that they're basically ready today, right? Like you on a laptop, if the laptop is powerful, you can do a zero knowledge proof over like literally 500,000 hashes in 1 second, right? And like 500,000 hashes is like more than an entire Ethereum block, right? So we can like prove pretty big forms of computation almost in real time at this point, right? It's like getting very strong. With FHE, I don't think we're quite at this point, but it's absolutely a space that I'm super looking forward to seeing grow over the next couple of years.
So I have a question from online. How do you feel about your blockchain technology and counterfeiting issues? Sorry.
I guess what kind of counterfeiting issues do they have in mind? You don't know? Yeah, it's like blockchains are kind of fundamentally, they are sort of the ultimate kind of anti-counterfeiting technology, right? In the sense that like, if you have like an on-chain record for like every copy of a thing, then like anyone can actually go on-chain and they can see like what the total number of copies are, and like if you have a copy, you can actually check that the copy is legit, right? So like it's actually like super powerful for a bunch of use cases. Like one random example, right, is like, let's take, I don't know, imagine like, let's say University of Waterloo decides to issue step one, issuing digital diplomas, right? You can do it with signatures, right? So you can have like a cryptographic key, and then that everyone knows what that cryptographic key is, and if you get a diploma, then like you get published and you have a signature, right? Now, what happens if instead of just having a signature, you actually publish it on chain, right? You don't actually have to publish everything on chain. You could just publish only a work over on chain. But you get two benefits, right? One benefit is if, let's say, if you need to revoke someone's diploma, either because, their key got hacked or because, it turns out that they plagiarized their fake data or whatever, then, like, you can actually, like, you would have to publish that message on chain. And if you publish it on chain, then, like, the person can no longer prove that they have an active diploma because there's, like, an on-chain record that they can see that, like, that particular one is not valid anymore. Another really nice benefit that you get is that you can prove that the key that's being used to issue these diplomas has not been hacked, right? Because like if a key gets hacked, then whoever hacks it, they might be able to just generate however many fake diplomas they want, and then they would be able to go and generate these signatures, and they go and just like quietly use them and probably not get caught, right? If you force diplomas, or at least like work over them to be on chain, then as soon as that happens, that's something that becomes publicly visible to everyone, right? And so evidence of a hack is something that just like becomes something that's immediately visible. It's just like like this is like very mandatory default way, and then you force it to, like basically, you can respond to it pretty much immediately, right? So blockchains, I think, like actually offer quite a bit of these interesting anti-counterfeiting options. I mean, though again, like I'm not sure, like exactly, what type of counterfeiting the asker had in mind.
Hi, Vitalik. Thanks for your time. I've been reading about peer-to-peer networks and how difficult they are to actually implement. Because I think the internet protocol is very counterintuitive. It just happens through peer-to-peer. Do you see the crypto space and projects becoming more and closer to that through peer-to-peer infrastructure? So, what are the biggest challenges big developers can tackle, such as more peer discovery?
Yeah, I mean, so it's an important problem, right? Because I mean, blockchain networks obviously run on peer-to-peer networks, and a lot of the like other infrastructure that runs like for blockchain applications also depends quite a bit on peer-to-peer. I think realistically, like one of the big challenges is like securing these networks against attacks, right? And like the two kinds of attacks are basically there's like eclipse attacks and there's DOS attacks, right? So like either you like find a way to disconnect the node from the network, or while still making that node think it's connected, or with a DOS attack you basically flood the network with fake messages and like basically cause like every node to not be able to like see any of the genuine messages, right? So there was for the first problem, I think we basically just like need to continue improving our mathematical models of peer-to-peer networks and like working on things like formal verification. For the and like we're just working on like more robust software in that field. For the second problem, I think there is this interesting category of solutions that's actually starting to be used within the Ethereum world, which is basically, again, zero-knowledge proof-based anti-DOS. Right? Basically, the idea is that if you have like some kind of identifier, like some kind of way of identifying that a node that's participating, like actually is a node that like has either is in some kind of like more restricted set where you can't just like go and create a billion fake participants, then you can make a zero-knowledge proof that you're one of these nodes, and by doing that, you get a right to publish a limited number of messages, right? And you can do this in such a way that, like, basically, if you get, let's say, the way this works is like every interval of time, like say every 1 second, gets assigned to a period, and you're only allowed to send one message per period. And like, if you need to send 10 messages immediately, you can like reuse previous periods you haven't used before, right? But you're like, in the long term, you're basically limited to like 1 message per period, right? And if you send 2 messages in the same period, then like because those messages have different hashes, like you do a thing where like basically like 2 points make a line and like you subtract and divide it, and you can figure out what the sender's private key is, and then you can basically kick them off the list, right? So with that kind of design, like you get privacy and you get this like anti-DOS property at the same time. And I think for a lot of protocols, that kind of feature is going to be super valuable.
Hi, thank you for the presentation, and congrats on the ETF being approved, by the way. So I do have some questions that are a little bit more on the money side of things. Okay. I hope you don't mind. First of all, what is your overall view on the main fundamental driver of market prices, by extension Ethereum? Okay. Do you believe that the majority of crypto is positively correlated? And do you believe that monetary policies such as quantitative tightening or the decline in federal global liquidity does have a big or small impact on prices? And finally, what is your view on Solana? Do you view it as a direct competitor to ETH, or more as something or like a chain where they can coexist and potentially benefit each other?
Yeah, okay, so I think, again, on the money side, I mean, I think there's a couple of factors that drive prices, right? I mean, ultimately prices come from like people buying and selling coins, and if more people buy, the price goes up, and if more people sell, the price goes down. So, like, that's true not just for coins, right? It's also true for stocks, it's true for houses, it's true for everything. And generally, when people buy, a lot of the time it's because they're making a prediction that there will be other buyers in the future. And like that can happen either for like speculative bubble reasons, or it can happen for fundamental reasons, right? And a fundamental reason is basically like if there's like some kind of like ultimate, you know, like its use value from either holding the coin or from burning it, right? And there's like a standard model in economics of like basically, you know, the present price of an asset is like the expected and like discounted future kind of returns that that asset generates, right? And so if there's like an expectation that the asset gets, you know, for example, like burns to pay transaction fees, then like that's also which like does happen with ETH and happens with other assets as well, for example, then like that's also like one of the drivers of present day value, right? And like, you know, people do like buy ETH to pay for transaction fees all the time. Another, but then you know, there are lots of different you know, like assets, and there's definitely some that are kind of like much more kind of chaotic and that have you know, like less fundamentals attached to them. I think regarding like stuff like quantitative easing, I think the big macro story here, right, is like over the course of civilization, like there's always been some kind of demand for sort of safe assets, or at least assets whose risk is uncorrelated, either with broader markets or with political events, right? And like for a long time, gold ended up serving that function, and like gold even today has like a $9 trillion market cap, right? So like gold is big, right? And you know, here, you know, we are in the third millennium, and I think in the third millennium, a lot of people are just like less interested in gold, and people are more kind of natively digital, and are, you know, like some basically the right kind of digital asset is like potentially just as valuable as a safe asset as you know, a shiny rock, and so. You know, there's definitely people who are buying all kinds of crypto assets for that reason as well, right? So I think it's, I mean, it really depends on different people, right? I think ultimately, yeah, like crypto prices are definitely just like a very chaotic system. I mean, regarding Solana, I think it's just a system that focuses on a different kind of use cases, like use cases that are you know, like much more performance demanding, and that are like less on the side of like demanding high levels of decentralization. And so, and, you know, there's definitely a bunch of use cases that they really care about that are like that. So I think it's just like a different kind of thing.
I think we have two more. We've got one here and then one up in Nancy.
Thanks for the presentation. Yeah, two things. Like one, do you think you could have grown Ethereum this much, say, in Canada? And the other one, how do you avoid being corrupted by the money bill people?
Yeah. I think, yeah, Ethereum, I think, is like inherently a worldwide project, and like I think a lot of the value of it comes from the fact that like you can really you know, bring people in from everywhere, right? So I think I mean, this is one of those places where crypto is just like very different from like AI or other spaces, for example, right? And so I think you know, it has benefited a lot from us being like very distributed, and like, you know, we continue to have quite a few people in Canada, right? And also having bases in you know, Switzerland and Berlin and Taiwan and Singapore and various places. So I think I think crypto benefits a lot from its globalness. And yeah, I mean, regarding avoiding getting corrupted by the money people, I think I think the key thing is to like you just like actually have the positive story of like what the space is for, that isn't just about tokens going up, and like actually like having that story and like being confident in it and actually working to make it happen, right? Because like if all that you do is you go around you know, like saying money is like like wanting to make 100x on your money in a year is bad, and like you don't offer an alternative, then like people just start to think about you as like this, like boring, moralizing grandpa, and then they ignore you, and then they follow the Twitter influencers and tell you, I guess you can't make 100x on your money in a year. So I think this is a big part of why it's like, really valuable to like actually continue to work on all of these kinds of things. I think, so yeah, and basically, yeah, just having and being confident in a better alternative. I don't want to say better alternative because, like, once again, as I said before, like, I don't believe in like 100% rejecting the money side, because I think if you 100% reject the money side, then like you get things like diaspora, which is like not having an impact because it wasn't able to gather resources. But like basically, make the money side actually serve some kind of greater purpose.
Hey there, Vitalik, I'm Daniel. And do you believe that in the long term, the financial industry will essentially become a crypto industry? Will crypto become more relevant than banks? In the same way the Uber become more relevant than the taxi industry?
I expect that this is going to be different in different countries. Like, I know that there's a lot of countries where the traditional financial system is not very effective, that just are cryptoizing to a very significant degree already, right? And this happens quite a bit in Argentina. I mean, in Turkey, there's like it's simple. There's like entire districts you can go to where you just like see a Bitcoin shop every couple hundred meters. And there's like actually, in the developing world, I think a lot of the demand like is and will continue to pick up even faster. I think in terms of like where it will pick up everywhere else, I mean, so one of the analogies that I always come back to, and like I think I use this analogy to kind of express my level of uncertainty, right? Is like basically, this is an article I wrote back in 2011. It's basically like, will crypto become like the Esperanto of finance, the Linux of finance, or the internet of finance, right? And like Esperanto, of course, very idealistic, artificial language, basically tries to be kind of more regular and easier to learn than all the other languages, with a goal of becoming the one language that everyone in the world can speak, so everyone can understand each other and we can have world peace. Of course, these days, like everyone in the world, or at least all of the political elites can speak English, but we still don't have world peace. Unfortunately, a lot of backsliding compared to 15 years ago, which is really sad, right? But and Esperanto just continues to be this kind of niche thing that has a hobbyist community. Then Linux is an interesting example because there's like this very idealistic side of it, and there's a lot of people that like keep on dreaming for this kind of like much greater level of mass adoption, but it just never ends up happening. But at the same time, Linux is like the backbone of the average server, and like all of your computer geek friends, so like half of them use Linux. I know I use Linux, and it just it is there in a lot of places without people even appreciating it, and then the internet, of course, just takes over everything, right? And I feel like right now, we're probably realistically on a trajectory to be in a similar place as Linux, right? Like it's, it feels like crypto is like succeeding as a subculture in some contexts, but then it is also taking over to like really fulfill people's basic needs in other contexts. And so, that might continue, or if, user experience improves enough, and, it'll end up being kind of like starting to take over in more other verticals as well. So we'll see.
Yeah, thanks Vitalik for coming on campus. I'm really curious to hear if you have any interesting stories speaking with anyone in the government space, any government entities on maybe how they're thinking about crypto now that the space has been built out. Are they hesitant to adopt it because it's something maybe they don't fully understand? Or again, in your experiences, have they been really interested in adopting any kind of crypto projects?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, like my view on this is somewhat biased because like the government groups that are more interested in crypto are the ones that end up wanting to talk to me. I mean, even still, I think there definitely is a lot of interest around the world. There definitely is. I think a lot of appreciation, and also for the fact that the entire world wants to be part of the 21st 21st century. And this is one of those spaces that just, because of how it operates, is really amenable to people from anywhere in the world participating. And you do not have to be in New York or the Bay Area to be at the front lines of crypto. You absolutely go. It's much less true than it is in AI, for example. And I think the ideas of having these kind of financial rails that both are more open and that all present more opportunities for people to have stronger verification and assurances about basically making sure that once the things that are going on are actually following the rules. That is something that does appeal to a lot of people. So there's definitely interest.
First of all, it's awesome to see the way you were mentioning that you don't have to be in Bay or New York to have impact. You have to see that in the halls we travel in was where the initial concepts of Ethereum were invented. What we are doing is we are trying to decentralize telecom itself. So we're building a telecom network on top of existing telecom networks. Okay. So that if there's any outages like AT&T that happen in the US or the Rogers that happen in Canada, that people can still continue to communicate. So I was wondering if you had any advice.
Yeah, okay, so I'm actually curious. So how does this work? Is it just aggregating existing telecoms, or are there any things other than telecoms that's connecting to it?
And so what we built is across 80 countries and 200 telecom networks, we aggregated together. Okay. And it's almost like a layer 2 blockchain that we built on it.
I see. So it's basically a thing for just rapidly switching between all these networks. Yeah, I think, that definitely feels like a no-brainer and a super valuable product to have. I think, of course, the other thing that I think is valuable to be prepared for is just the possibility that you're going to get all of the networks not working at the same time, right? Because at some point, I think a big part of the value proposition of all this stuff is the greater possibility that it will continue to function in a real emergency. And in a real emergency, it's possible that there's hidden common infrastructure dependencies all over the place, right? It's very possible that all the stuff is going to break at the same time. And then, in that case, what do you do, right? And I actually think there's good answers for this, and I actually think even things like Starlink, right? Hopefully we get Starlink and we get 5 competitors to Starlink, right? Then, basically what you have is you have the possibility to also resell, basically automatically connect to nearby Starlink connections and essentially do multi-hop, especially with some of the long distance Wi-Fi that's coming out. So I think there's a lot of really fascinating things to do there in terms of just building that up, right? I personally absolutely wants to see a world where basically access to the internet is I don't even want to just say it's human right, because that is not even quite the I want a level of assurance that's even higher than that, right? Part of the atmosphere, right, is the level of assurance that I want, right? If we can get to internet connectivity having that level of assurance, I think that would be a super amazing thing, right? And anything that takes us even step by step along the course of that, I support.
Vitalik, I know we can keep you here all day, but you have to catch a flight.
Yes.
So on behalf of everyone here, I would like to thank you. We have a little token of our appreciation for
Thank you.
And everyone, if you could help